companies in the high-tech industry, they tend to cluster together geographically by research field. Actually, there was a study that just came out that said the top 10 cities in computer science account for 70% of all inventors in that field. 10 cities, 70% of all inventors. So the question is, how can we nourish these sort of ecosystems or clusters and to help grow certain industries? That's the question that we want to discuss today. My name is Daniel Rettig. I'm the chief editor of ADA. You've probably seen my boss Miriam Meckel on the podium yesterday. We're a digital education platform and bring out a magazine, and that's basically what ADA does. And I'm the host for today. And I have 4 experts with me who will talk about that topic. I'll introduce them, and then we'll get to the housekeeping. So the first guest is a special advisor for innovation clusters at Innovation Norway, Kristianne Paasche. Please give a round of applause. The second guest right next to her is the managing partner of the German consulting company Co-Shift, Janka, Krings-Klebe. Welcome to have you here. Next to her, we have the communication and content manager, I have to read it out, I'm sorry, of the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, Lucia Seel. Good to have you here. And last but not least, the sole male on the panel, the founder of, next to me, right, the founder of Engage Innovate, which is a global strategy and innovation consulting company, Kristianne Rangen. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, how are we going to do this? As we noticed, probably 75 minutes is a lot of time for a panel discussion. So the way we're going to do this, we have 4 guests, and each of one will have a short introductory speech to prepare the presentation, and after that, we'll dive into the discussion. Since it is a pretty small, or let's say comfortable room, we're hoping for an interactive discussion. So anytime during the discussion that you have a question or you want to contribute something, just raise your hand. We have a mic in the room, or post something on Twitter. I have my cell phone with me and I'll check it from time to time. So of course we're all familiar with the notion ladies first, but since we couldn't agree which ladies to start with, no, just kidding, we actually agreed to start with the male on the panel, not because of the male dominance, but rather because of the topic that you're an expert in, and because we think that you can give us sort of a broad overlook on the whole notion of innovation superclusters and why there's a difference. I learned that during the preparation between ecosystems and superclusters. So please, again, maybe a round of applause, because the first one to start, Kristianne Rangen.
Thank you.
Don't fall off stage.
No,
right?
I'm going to go off stage. I'm going to try to back on stage. Yes. So a show of hands, and this is the do not do the following. Show of hands. How many of you know the term innovation supercluster? Show of hands. Yes. All right. So. Excellent. You guys are now primed for the chocolate race. So the best performer, not just the best question, but the best performer gets that chocolate. Yeah? So I'm going to give a brief introduction, but I want you to think about national level, industry-led, government-supported. So some of you may have just walked out of the presentation with President Tan, and really what I'm going to introduce is along those lines, but obviously different from what Singapore has been doing. So I've been working on innovation clusters and innovation superclusters for a number of years now. Written some very, very light reports on purpose, although the last one came out also in Mandarin Chinese, so it's not as light for most of us. And notably, we tried to make this content very easily accessible, very easily understandable, and very visual. So we actually make a strong point of not going into writing academic material, but writing material that most people can grasp in a short session. And that's what I'm going to try to follow on. And this actually builds into a book that we're publishing next year around innovation superclusters. We're really trying to take best practices from around the globe, some short and sharp insights, and a number of tools that can be applied. And basically, this is going to be a playbook for how to do it, a self-guide to building massive innovation superclusters. 3 key findings that I want to communicate with you. Number 1, we are now seeing that innovation superclusters is on the rise. So people that are in that field, they are now recognizing that the community is growing. There are more interest. There's a growing number of kind of key people and key initiatives. Second, around the world there are roughly 7,000 clusters, specific legal entities around traditional cluster organization. Most of them are now going through a earthshake. Really, the ground is shaking beneath their feet because they're facing a paradigm shift in how to think, structure, lead, and build these clusters. And finally, and this is the hard part, a visionary government required. It's like saying, you buy an IKEA furniture and some assembly required, and then Friday night over a beer, it's not that easy. We'll show you. So, I'm going to take you on a very short case study, and I'm going to need your help. And we're going to say, in Austria, a handful of people, so that's the 3 of you, 1, 2, and 3. You got together over drinks and said, industrial AI. How strong is the country in that at the moment, you would say? Not that strong. Great starting point, right? So the 3 of you get together as industry leaders and say, we should do something about that. And we can sit around and wait for government, and we can sit around and wait for everybody else, but let's just get started, yeah? So the 3 of you, representing 3 companies in Austria, say, we should get together and start building a bottom-up initiative by, not visionary government, by visionary industry leaders, a really cool industrial AI supercluster initiative. It is not technically a supercluster because it's just getting started, yeah? And you have a few people in the middle that do part-time management. I mean, you could call them employees, but you don't have money for salaries yet, so technically not. And you start calling some friends. And you say, we need to connect and talk about this, because over the next 20 years, industrial AI is going to be very important. And we want Austria to take a significant, even a dominant position. Agree? Good. Now, you have been slowly recruiting these guys, and they're they're medium interested, but they're getting there. And you start connecting the pieces. You actually start making introductions. You start discussing, what are you doing in industrial AI? Nothing. Well, that's a good starting point, because I'm not doing anything either. But we should find a common ground to get started. And then you start tapping into other government resources. You start connecting these and say, around industrial AI for Austria, we need a national policy, we need a national research program, we need a national funding plan, and we can't have all these distributed nodes, we need to connect it. What do you think, what is the next step that we need here to create more knowledge around industrial AI in Austria? Exactly. So we get these, and we realize, if you go and look, you'll actually find a number of people in academia in Austria, typically the next row right here, and they're all doing industrial AI projects, but they feel very lonely, right? Big problem. So we bring in more corporates. I mean, that's you guys. And you have no connection, no relationship, and you've never been to the same parties, right? So we bring in more people, and we start connecting them. And then we realize this system has some structural flaws. What do you guys see as the flaws here? And Peter, I'm kind of looking at you because you'll spot this really quickly, yeah? What are some of the structural flaws? And there are different perspectives here. Go ahead.
Each of the similar parties are not really connected to each other.
Exactly. So there are extremely weak links between these knowledge nodes. So one of the first things you want to do, now that you're sort of maturing and you're realizing what do we actually need to do, is you want to connect the dots and you want to connect the parties. Now you're probably realizing that's the people in the back. What's now missing? So when we're missing money, that's that group over there. They're always the last ones to join. Well, we need, at least one single entrepreneur just to sort of cross the dot. Now, what I'm showing you here is what's called triple helix. So this is the traditional European innovation policy dominant logic that we've had now for around 25 years. It does not work anymore because we do need many more of these entrepreneurs. But what does the entrepreneurs need to move from a startup to a scale-up phase? I'm looking right at you guys. You need a lot of capital. Now, the problem is these guys traditionally are disconnected. So you have all of these nodes coming together. You now have more people working full-time, and you start recruiting members. And you realize that we need to connect these better. So you have projects, you have Christmas parties, you have newsletters, you have conferences, you do boot camps, you do hackathons, you do a lot of collaboration development projects, and you start connecting the dots. And people realize, wow, Austria, we really had all the pieces, but we didn't have anyone that could actually help us connect this. Yeah? And then probably some visionary government comes in and say, I'm really proud of the work that we've done. And when you look at Austria, we are definitely the best government, good example, maybe not, in Europe in building industrial AI supercluster. So this is what I do. I could talk a lot about theory, not very interesting, but it's really about building industries for the future by connecting thousands of organizations or entities around some common industries. You don't want to do this around legacy industries. You want to do it around emerging industries. And you want to do it by bringing people together. This is from a project we ran in Malaysia. You have hundreds of people coming together. And this is a training program we recently ran in Frankfurt. And the bear really helps. EU, Spain, France, Italy, Romanians, Germans, Norwegians, but they're all discussing how do we actually do this in practice, and the bear really helps. Yeah. Now, very briefly, superclusters are specifically built legal organization around a domain, while ecosystems are very overlapping, but they're more fluid, less organized, less structured. And to wrap up, I can just give you two examples. So this is the Canadian Ocean Supercluster, legal organization, government funding, very, very ambitious for building Canada's ocean economy. And then we have the Norwegian Seafood Cluster, which basically has been tasked with, we want you to 3x the total value of the Norwegian seafood space in 10 years. Good luck. Very different from entrepreneurial hubs, very different from tech hubs, but they do overlap, but we need to understand the differences. 3 steps very closely: industries of the future, clear problem statement and aspirations, and then we have to invest in long-term strategy and capability development. And on a closing note, it's really cool kind of to say that yesterday, India launched its first supercluster initiative, and they did it using our playbook, using our material, without having to fly me to India at all. And that's kind of fun. So that's my introduction. We'll be talking more about it. Thank you for listening, and thank you for joining in building a very early Austrian industrial AI supercluster. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristianne, for the brief introduction. I know you could talk hours for that, so thanks for the short summary of your work. And again, thanks for taking part already. That's exactly what we want to do here, be interactive. You already mentioned the EU, so that's what we'll dive into more now, sort of a European perspective, which Lucia will give. Lucia, the stage is yours.
Before I go to you, I'll start with connecting with Austria. Actually, Austria has 60 clusters. Can you imagine? In this small country, we're having a agglomeration of 60. So the question is, which out of the 60 is the supercluster? But that's a different thing. So what I would like to welcome you to the world of the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. But before we go there, I just want to make sure that we're sharing the same understanding. We speak the same language. What do we mean by the cluster? Kristianne made the first introduction. But if you look at the outer circle, that's the whole industrial domain, let's say automotive sector. And according to Michael Porter, that's the cluster is the agglomeration of companies, academia, research, government, all operating in a geographical proximity. Now, from this geographical proximity, applying policy intervention, you're taking some of these actors and you're bringing them into the middle circle. That's a cluster initiative, which is actually the operating ecosystem. They're coming into this ecosystem, which is to be understood like an interface where there's more opportunity for innovation through collaboration. And who does the collaboration? That's the small circle, which is the cluster organization, also known or addressed as a management team. But look at them, I'm looking at Peter. Yesterday you said orchestrators. These people are actually the ecosystem orchestrators, the cluster organizations. And how does a cluster organization look like? Provocative, I said, versus ecosystem or clusters as ecosystems. And I took on purpose a model that was developed in 2012 by a Danish cluster consultancy. And where you see there, it's the triple helix, but as well, what Kristianne introduced as well, the entrepreneurs and the venture capital. Now, at the time, that was a very progressive model. And now back to 2019, reality check. And after having profiled more than 1,000 cluster organizations in Europe and beyond, I dare saying that actually the large majority still is in the triple helix level of development. So we feel the wind of change is blowing. That's why we need supercluster approach, call them clusters of change, whatever. But there need also to be a change happening at this level. Now, I took Rita's advice to go for symbolism and storytelling. You shared the other day, so that's the implementation. Right. And the story behind it's very short. Back in 2007, after I finished my first EU-funded project, from the perspective of local clusters in the small region of Upper Austria, we found out two things. One, we were not alone out there. And two, the trend was towards collaboration across regions and across sectors. Why across sectors? It's because putting together an automotive cluster together with a plastics cluster, together with a mechatronics cluster, you are increasing the potential of inducing innovation instead of putting together 3 automotive clusters. And that leads to the next question. Okay, I know I'm not alone, but where are the others in Europe? I mean, cross regions, cross countries. So that idea came into my mind, 2007. There was not really LinkedIn, Facebook was not really everywhere. And the idea was to create a platform that actually acts like a brain. So you have very specialized areas that are able to communicate and to interconnect at a very, very fast speed. So actually, 2007, 2019, this is the entry point to the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. It's a long name. It can be also addressed as ECCP, and it's not cluster brain, unfortunately, but it reflects what actually it is about in 4 big words. And it is a platform funded totally by the European Commission, and that's a very important thing. It is owned by the European Commission. And it is operated by a consortium consisting of myself and 3 other partners. So we are like the ecosystem manager for this platform. Now, what services we provide? First of all, we're providing cluster mapping. We're giving visibility to these clusters, exactly addressing the need that I mentioned earlier. Since the current strategic objective of the platform is to support clusters collaborate for the purpose of going international, then we are also offering specialized information describing the cluster landscapes in countries of strategic interest for the clusters, for the industries beyond Europe. We're also offering a partner search facility, which is to be understood like a marketplace. Unfortunately, if you're looking at it, I don't want to disappoint and sell you too much. It doesn't work, but nothing is perfect. We are also hosting the European Strategic Cluster Partnerships, which are other initiatives funded by the European Commission, small projects, a couple of cluster organizations across Europe getting together in order to go together to China, to the US, Brazil, Mexico, wherever the industry goes. And last but not least, we're not just a virtual platform. We combine virtuality and reality, and that's why we put a lot of emphasis in organizing real matchmaking for the clusters. I'll maybe say it another time. It's like the partnering value chain that we're having here. Now, these are the two VIPs, and the VIPs are the very important pages that are in this presentation. The platform is unique. We have no competition worldwide. Nobody does it. There's nowhere else where you can find information on clusters, be it in Europe or in other countries. And this is the mapping showing you where the cluster organizations are. But beyond that, if you click on one of these colorful regions, you can have a statistical information. So basically, there's an analysis, unfortunately made still on NACI codes, that gives the policymakers the instruments and some data analysis in order to take some fact-based decision making, for doing fact-based decision making. You have some KPIs here. The platform, as I said, has more than 1,080 cluster organizations profiled, out of which 90% are European and 10 of them are from countries beyond Europe. And if there is one thing that should be important and tells a lot about what the platform has become, that's the percentage of 65%. So the platform has a huge amount of content. It's really grown up, not like this, as we had planned it, but it grew up like this. But 65% of the users of these clusters are uploading and publishing their own content. That makes it a platform developed by cluster organizations, by the cluster community, for the cluster community. And that's something that has hardly been achieved in let's say, in an initiative owned by the European Commission. So actually, how did we achieve this? I would say first, passion. What else? Secondly, understanding the community, being part of it, being able to respond to the needs expressed by the users. So that's user-driven approach. It's, service is our success, and I would like to thank Niki Lauda for using this motto when he launched Lauda Air. We make no compromise on quality, as we strive for that. I mean, we did missionary marketing. I don't know whether the term exists. I hope Phil does not feel offended by using this term, but actually our community, this is not, the Google ecosystem. This is a very narrow niche ecosystem that we had, so that was possible to do, but it's hard work to go almost individually and using all the instruments and mechanisms we had to convince them to join. We are applying the 5F. Learned from Rick the other day that there are 4 Fs that they applied in the Tupperware ecosystem, and that is fast, focused, flexible, and fun. And I would like to add another one, the 5th F, and that is friendship. Because if you're doing good networking, that's the bonus you get. And let's not forget that although the economies are going to be led or fueled by data in the future, actually ecosystems are fueled by relationships, and that's what makes actually very powerful these mechanisms. Yes, what else? I think although we are not having ownership on this initiative, we believe in its purpose. So we believe that by bringing clusters together, we are empowering companies, the industry, to grow, to become more competitive, to become better. And we look at this as our contribution to a more knowledgeable and more interconnected world. These things that I tell you may not be very special. I mean, at the Peter Drucker Forum, we have been addressed, and I've been witnessing a lot of really very smart information and smart speakers. But what makes maybe from our perspective very special is the way this platform is funded. It is funded by European taxpayers' money. And that's a different context, because it gives you a different accountability and a different responsibility for doing these things. And yes, the year 2020 is coming soon, and what I have told you about so far, it has been about the startup phase of the platform. And 2020, very soon, 1st of January, we're going actually to start the scale-up phase of it, and we managed in 4 years actually to do a 9x scaling up. And this may also not seem very much, but imagine how hard it is to go pitching in front of investors, but imagine how hard it is to let someone else pitch for you in front of 28 member states who have to agree to put this amount of money, which is unprecedented for one initiative. So the focus changes. Is it not more just giving visibility to the clusters and supporting them to internationalize? It's about more looking at cluster in their whole ecosystem, mapping not just the organizations, but all the stakeholders involved, looking at more modern statistical analyses in order to make the policy making better. It is about increasing the connectivity, and by that strengthening the community that is already out there. It is about providing them capacity building, knowledge, skills. It's one of the challenges of today's world. And last but not least, the final goal is actually collaboration. So if we're out there to produce innovation, that should happen through collaboration. So just before, I think it's 15 minutes now, and yes, now I've been always saying we, although not knowing actually what happens with me from the 1st of January 2020, but just 15 minutes ago, I just got the call that actually our consortium won. So it's a hat trick for me. It's going to be, so I'm literally very, very happy to share. You're the first ones to know that this is going to continue in the same manner. So don't want to take more time, but some messages to conclude. First of all, we're a unique platform. There's nothing else comparable in the world, and we're actually somehow, to make it placative, the Google, the Tinder, and probably the LinkedIn of the cluster community. We are the ecosystem of the ecosystems. We're the platform connecting clusters. And what I think it's so important to stress right now, if we're looking at ecosystem in a singular manner and not interconnected way, which is what we're trying to achieve, we're actually losing out a lot of opportunity, and we're not exploiting and unleashing the full power of ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. There were some business aspects that you mentioned and platform models. We want to dive more deeper into the business side of our topic. That's what our next guest is going to talk about. She's the managing partner of Co-Shift Janka Krings-Klebe. Stage is yours.
Thanks a lot. So Kristianne and Lucia, it was a pleasure listening to you. I still keep thinking about key issues that make innovation superclusters particularly successful. So for me, they need to generate lots of innovations and turn them into profitable business. During many years working for Bosch and later as a business coach, I've observed all kinds of innovation setups like venture capital units, corporate accelerators, startup platforms, digital innovation labs, and so on. Let me tell you the ugly truth. Very few of those innovation setups work well. These innovation setups, although very popular, fail in turning their innovations into profitable business. Do you know any unicorn generating a positive cash flow? Startups are not funded to generate a positive cash flow. Startups are funded to make their owners rich. Therefore, the start by innovation model does not work for superclusters. When superclusters cannot create positive or profitable business, they cannot keep investors on board, they cannot keep innovators on board, and they become something like a money-eating black hole. To be clear, innovation setups should not fall into this trap. Innovation superclusters should not fall into this trap. They need to turn their innovation into profitable business, generating a positive cash flow. Next question, Who knows how to make positive cash flows? Well, usually corporations do. So, just an idea. Superclusters should take the money-making ability of corporations and combine them with the creative power of innovation ecosystems. The combination of both can generate profitable business operations at large scale. The critical part is to achieve close collaboration of very different participants. Innovators are good at exploring new opportunities. Corporations are good at efficiently scaling business. They have all what innovators still lack: resources, business capabilities, customer base, and market access. So to profit, both need to collaborate. Starting joint business operations is the best way to do it. Jointly figuring out how to turn ideas into profitable business and positive cash flows greatly increases the odds of success. So for innovation, this is a well-known partnership concept and one that many corporations aim for. Yet, very few succeed. Not for lack of trying, but for structural reasons. My daughters would say they are not the fast and furious. So they are not fast enough, they are not flexible enough. Corporations are simply not built for the speed required in innovation space. Nor are they built to continuously enter and exit partnerships in joint business operations. Therefore, if they want to participate in innovation superclusters, they need to adapt. The challenge now is to enter and set up very quickly those joint business operations. Current management practices don't support this. Just think of IP management, risk management, financing and staffing of operations. Corporations today follow governance principles that simply leave no room. No room for the openness, transparency, speed, and trust that is required in innovation setups. Management practices are roadblocks for successful participating in joint business operations. Corporations need to remove these barriers in order to participate and profit. Corporations, therefore, need to adapt to work in all kinds of innovation ecosystems. So now let's go down to business. For many years leading transformation projects at Bosch, I have tried literally dozens of different strategies to make this happen. From my own experience and learning from other companies, I have found only one, yes, it's only one, strategy that removes these barriers at speed and scale. And that is that corporations themselves must become a business ecosystem. They need to transform their internal setup to work like a business ecosystem. Amazon and Haier already turned their companies into such ecosystems. And I did similar transformation work at Bosch. And let me tell you how to catch up with those giants. Corporations need to learn to manage and govern their business operations according to principles of adaptivity, customer need, and value add. Those market-based principles can be applied to internal operations, thereby changing all management and governance practices. Learning how to do this is the most important step, and corporations cannot skip it because there's no shortcut. Only after having attained internal adaptivity and speed, only after being accustomed to new management and governance practices, the next step is possible: to collaborate with external partners in joint business operations. So having these collaboration practices in place makes joint business much easier for corporations, because then these required practices are already established and are used in daily business for existing operations. Extending them to accommodate new external partners now is simple. Previous barriers for joint business operations are gone. All existing business is run according to principles optimized for joint business operations. Following these steps, corporations can achieve remarkable adaptation and innovation capabilities. Their market-based structure fluidly balance available resources and capabilities with business needs. Their internal dynamism now is so high that they can rapidly adapt to emerging customers or business opportunities or market needs. Having mastered these steps, corporations can participate and profit in all kinds of business ecosystems, bringing in their corporate power to quickly grow promising opportunities into big business. And that is how corporations can profit from innovation superclusters. That is how innovators can profit from corporate capabilities in superclusters. And I think that is where superclusters can live up to their purpose, pulling in entrepreneurial superpower to create progress through innovation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Janka. And we have our second guest from Norway who will give us some practical insights into her learning. Kristianne, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you for inviting me here. It's been such a great 2 days being together with, I think it was 18 of the 50 most influenced thinkers of the world, which made me actually yesterday a bit afraid. And I felt maybe I'm in trouble, so I did what most girls do, I think, even when they turn 50, I called my dad. And I said, oh God, I'm going to be like with the rocket scientists of the management and leadership, and I'm going to do a speech. And I asked, what are you going to talk about? And I told him what I was going to talk about, and he said, this doesn't sound like rocket science, you're going to be just fine. So I'm here. I'm going to talk about this from a more practical point of view, and from a different point of view from what you've been hearing from yesterday. I'm coming from a national point of view. So I'm going to talk about this from a policymaker's point of view. So, this is Norway. This is Norway. As you can see, we are very dependent on the oil and gas sector. And we have been so for more than 30 years, which you can describe that as our legacy, actually. Because for 30 years, we've been in this super profit industry, building society, a welfare society, which is very extensive and very good, and has made us the happiest people in the world. But there are some clouds coming up. Climate and technology, that's a challenge for us. And of course we need to change. There's no question about it. We need a more diversified economy moving forward. There's no sustainability in the brown areas that we can see over here. So we need change. And as a policymaker, how do we support this change in the economy in the best way? How do we actually do that? Well, we need insight. We need to understand what is happening. So the first thing we did was going back and looking at where is actually change happening now. And from 2003 to 2014, we dived into the new jobs created. And as you can see, it's evenly distributed among 3 different groups of companies. The existing companies, the new companies, new small companies, and the new growth companies. And if you look at the new companies, there's an interesting thing here, because 2/3 of the new jobs is actually created in new companies. But if you dive a little bit deeper into it, you will see that only 10% of the new companies actually grow, but they still encounter for 1/3 of the new jobs, which means that there is a potential here. If we can get more of the new companies to grow, we can also create more jobs. So this is one of the things that we need to work with. And then we looked at the status of our innovation ecosystems. We have, since 2005, had a cluster program in Norway, which is mainly supporting established companies. And they are all stuck in the triple helix. This is where they are, this is where they operate, and as you can see from the previous slide, they're not creating enough growth. If we are going to do the shift, they have to do more than what we have seen going backward. So forward, we need to get these companies out of the triple helix and into something else. And then, of course, we have the same issue as the rest of the EU. We are high on science, we are quite good, but we don't manage to convert it into commercial companies or commercial products that we can bring to the market. And we don't do it enough, and we don't do it fast enough. And then we have another part of our ecosystem, which deals with the startups. And if you remember the numbers from before, it's actually a big number game. Because we have been able, providing programs since kindergarten, almost, to when you study, focusing on entrepreneurship. I went out of business school in 1992, and I went to one of my professors, and I said, "Oh, I really want to create my own company." And he looked at me and said, you are so clever, you can get a job, no problem." That was back then, yeah. That was back then, and that is in 1992. So we have done lots of things, creating a better society for startups, but they don't grow, which is a problem. And trying to do this with more big numbers, or even bigger numbers, is not a sustainable way of moving forward. And then we dived into the startups, and then we start asking, why don't they grow? What is the problem? Why don't they grow? And one thing we see is that, you know, being in the oil and gas sector, which is like a really super profit way of running business, makes them not so willing to grow. Because when they have made a lot of money, they have a car, they have a house, they have everything. Why should we go global? It's not necessary. So they become a bit lazy, and that's what I'm referring to as culture. We don't have this really culture for growth. We need to do something about that. And of course, with no culture for scaling up, we don't have the competence for scaling up. We lack people that has actually done it, been out there, and actually done the scaling. And also, many of the startups only have local customers, domestic customers. They don't have this global view on things. And for the capital market of Norway, there's a lot of money, but it's still going into real estates or more equity-run businesses, more asset-run businesses. So it's very difficult to get the real deep capital in Norway to invest in venture. That's sort of a new game in Norway. So this is where we're coming from. And the answer, we are then going internationally, looking at these hubs that are actually managing the growth. These are the growth hubs of the world. So we were diving into and trying to understand, how are they actually growing? What are they doing? And there are some actually studies and research being done, diving into these kind of growth hubs around the world. So I've been using these. And this is the answer that we are trying to work on now. It's actually combining. It's combining. Yes, like you said, or like we have to make the corporates and the entrepreneurs working together, because then they can really make the strengths out of each other. So that's what we will focus on from a policy point of view moving forward. How can we make these two today very separated innovation ecosystem start working together? And not only working together, because if you look at the growth hubs, they are not only working together, but they are globally connected, and they understand how to work together with the other innovation ecosystems in the world. And they do understand their role, and they do understand how to make win-win connections. So we cannot only build, the ecosystems in Norway. We need to inspire them to get globally connected in order to make the companies grow. So, our moving forward, we have launched a 3-level cluster program in Norway. First, we need the local connectiveness, so that's the first level. We need to inspire them to look outside the members, outside the geographical area where they have their strength. And we also need to support them when they want to go out globally. And in addition to that, we need to build superclusters. And today, one of the things that we lack in the clusters that we look at is size. They're too small. If they're really going to go abroad and have this really global set, they need to cooperate. So we need to, today we have 10 ocean clusters. And we need to find policies to make them unite and then go out into the global market. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kristianne. So now let's get to the question, and I'll start with you. You mentioned the oil and gas industry, which has been working for a long time in Norway, and now the time has come, or the realization has been made a long time ago that something has to change. Doesn't it sort of show the danger of being dependent on, no matter if you want to call it a supercluster or an ecosystem?
Yes and no. Yes, of course. It shows actually the dilemma, the dilemma of understanding what is your core business and what is kind of your new business also relates to a national level. Because we need to run our traditional business, which is the oil and gas business, but we also need to start looking at new areas where we can use the core competence in new areas. And I think that's the new situation for nations as well. I'm so happy to have Rita here, who's written a book about this, which says that we cannot only relate on one core in a business for a long time, and we cannot do that in a nation either. We have to, start looking at different areas where we can spend, the core competence of a country. Okay. So I think it's you have to stay with the core, but you also have to make it. Running superclusters on a national, it's almost like a startup. You have to, put some seeds out there, see if there is enough businesses like Kristianne told us to build up a supercluster, and maybe most of them will die. But hopefully we will get an IA cluster or something in a way. So
Kristianne, I want to confront you with an analogy. In basketball, they say that it matters how good your best player is. In soccer, it says that it matters how good your worst player is. The analogy would be a supercluster. It has some sort of elite cliche coming with it. What I mean is a country better off if it really has, if it focuses on some superclusters and sort of, to put it bluntly, forget the rest?
I think you answered your own question. The answer is absolutely yes. And this goes back to the most basic economic geography theories that certain countries are better at certain things than others. And if you have that as a principle, you want to be best at the areas you can be best at. It's called smart specialization within the EU. It's a little bit like if you take Austria, and Austria say, you know what, we're going to be world champions of oil and gas. Maybe not a good idea. So you have to figure out where can we compete and win globally, and then you have to put relatively much more resources into those selected areas, and you make sure that you win those. And if you try to spread out too thinly, which is the problem with most of the cluster programs today, you're going to end up with a lot of medium players on the court.
I see.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Lucia, go
I
ahead.
would like to point on to pick up on that. Actually, the question is the supercluster just nationwide, or can it be a European supercluster? And here it's the perspective. You're having an automotive cluster in Upper Austria. You're having one in Germany, in Munich, so the proximity is there. Are you actually going to bring or encourage them to get together, not necessarily through intervention, but encourage them to get together and create something like a meta cluster? That's maybe another terminology that may be until they reach the level of the supercluster. So by creating this type of 2, 3, 4 really ambitious, courageous clusters who take the initiative first to start creating their own ecosystem, but a very, let's say, strategic-oriented one. And then you can act with this type of meta clusters, reaching a global position and get, the status of superclusters. And I'm thinking of Nobu-san. You just told me you visited in Denmark, the Medicon Valley Alliance, which is actually a binational cluster, a unique example in Europe, by the way, which is officially operating across the borders, Swedish and Danish, in the Øresund area. So there are such, and right now I would say just very quickly, it is a supercluster already. I mean, with the implications it has in Japan and the collaboration. So maybe thinking not necessarily in the national boundaries, but European ones.
Adding to that, how worried are you that in the the political climate right now, that cross-national collaboration is maybe harder to achieve than in other times?
From a European perspective, I think we are talking very much about cross-regional collaboration, and there's a lot of effort going from the European perspective in supporting exactly the regions in Europe. We're having about 280 regions in Europe, and there's already a challenge bringing, a French cluster to collaborate with a Romanian one. So before we start on that, I think the smart specialization that Chris mentioned, it's looking at the strengths at regional level, what are the opportunities that are out there, not necessarily investing the money for the next funding period in the existing strength, but looking at the opportunities that are out there by making some switches and putting the money into what has potential, but not necessarily creating something new from scratch. That's also wrong. So putting all these things together and looking into the strengths area at the European level, I think it may work.
You wanted to add something?
Yeah,
There's a question here.
There is?
Okay,
All right, let's have some chaos. Perfect.
Cool.
I'd like to put some into the discussion. We are talking about structures like corporates, and it's just science and stories. Actually, we should talk about people, because people share with each other. So at the moment, I'm building some kind of cluster between companies, total different businesses, but same problems like AI or whatever, and just bringing them together. But I realize it's not the companies, it's then the people. They start sharing and working, and it's so much knowledge generated, and then now they ask what we're going to do with that knowledge. Who owns it? That's quite, but not in a difficult way. They just think, can we make a company out of this? We discover it together. So that this is quite interesting. My learning, and very important is, much deeper, is trust. Do we share what we know? If we don't share what we know, it's theft on humanity, and we don't have enough time, like 12, 15 years, to solve our really big problems on the planet. We think about new technology, new green tech. That's not the point. The point is we know already. Why don't we just share it and force to make it transparent?
Thanks for your input. And adding to that, I'll hand the question to you, but there has been a tweet. I don't know if it's from this room, but it fits perfectly. A lot of the talks connect ecosystems and technology. Why aren't we talking more about the ecosystems we as humans need to create and participate in? And most importantly, how are we going to do this? And how do you, as a leader, create the relationships needed internally? Janka, you feel
Nice question. During my work at Bosch, we implemented a kind of social platform social business platform, to do business in a more connected way. And we started to get teams onto this platform, also teams that were not sitting in the same room or in the same country, but teams sitting around the world. You can imagine telephone conference as quite a nightmare. To make them collaborate on a social platform, digital solution. The most benefit out of this platform is transparency, because you can find all the information you need. You have within a team, for example, or within a group, shared information on the same level. And this worked so well that we could reduce separate processes from 4 weeks to 6 days, just by having everyone on the same information level, sharing information. The problem is you need to generate a culture that's based on trust, openness, and transparency. And it was really hard work to have this transparency as default, especially in a very technician, engineering-driven big company in Germany. So this was really a challenge. But we achieved so much benefits from sharing those information, having the same platform, that it's really worth the efforts we put into establishing this platform.
But didn't you experience some sort of backlash against your ideas?
No,
Not at all?
no. Collaboration is key of all kinds of business, what we do. You cannot do business without talking to your customers. You cannot do business without talking to your employees. So it's everything we do is a kind of collaboration and cooperation, and therefore sharing information is key.
And we have that collaboration here too, because you have a question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it pretty much digs into your last statement, because we talked so much about on the various levels, international, in Europe, in a nation, in a company setup that you described, the transformational aspirations that you have on how to build this kind of platform. And to be honest, if I look at companies and they already have that difficulty of the dual system, so to say, or the ambiguity topic, and how to get just a startup into the ecosystem of a normal, let's say, company. And I see how much, once you agreed on the strategic purpose and you translate it to all of the structural and most of all cultural questions that are evolving from it, it's already so difficult. So my question would be, because a cluster and then a supercluster, it's just getting more complicated and more complex in that scenario. What is the key attribute that you think glues that together and holds it together, beside the human aspect, which is in the core, but which would be the key criteria that you think makes a cluster successful?
Goes out to everyone.
Yeah, I can. You are pointing out what we lack when we start working systemically, like we're doing now. It's actually the good KPIs moving forward. Going back, when we looked at what is a successful cluster, we looked at productivity, we looked at value creation based on revenue and turnover. Now we need to look at deal flows. We need to look at new numbers when we look at success. So it's very difficult. I would say it's a number of things that you need to follow. And I have to comment on the human thing, because what we see also, we can talk about platforms, we can talk about technology, but at the end, it's all about humans. And instead of talking about platforms, we should talk about houses, where we put people inside and where we make sure that they have the support around it. If I were you and I had these people working together, sharing knowledge, and they came up with this great idea, and they were wondering what we're going to do about it. Let's create a company. Well, I would tick off one success. So yes. So I think we need to realize it's all about people. We need to have a set of KPIs that we follow, and it's not one pill sort it all, but it's people. And I thought when I started working with this that we could have a technology platform and everybody can just tick, tick, tick. It's not like that. We need to have houses where people can actually move into and be part of. And remember, our innovation clusters is not about the core business, being more productive. It's about, what are we going to do next? And that means that it's very valuable to sit along startups, people that are doing technology that is far from what you're doing in your core, investors, all these kind of people, in a physical area where you can talk to them. But we need also to be able to attract not only people from Norway, but people outside Norway, if we are going to succeed in doing the transformation of our economy. We cannot do it by ourselves.
See.
I think a very quick and easy answer is a cluster is successful if the companies are better off by participating it as they would be without being inside this ecosystem. The problem is here that it's very difficult to measure this impact. Why is it that? Because you cannot say a company is more successful because of that, because it can be from other framework conditions that influence, it may be the geopolitical climate, whatever happens that leads to that development. But in reality is they give you feedback. They are satisfied with how they grow, with the support they receive by being in this facilitated ecosystem. You're growing organically by attracting other members, joining it, and broadening the horizon of participation and the other knowledge that comes into the network by that. It grows by the complexity of projects that they can do together. So just like they start maybe small, two companies in a clusters, they are doing just like a little bit of incremental innovation, and then a couple of years after, you're seeing literally big projects developed by things, and that is a development, a growth path within the cluster that wouldn't be able without having this supported, orchestrated infrastructure. And I need to get back to you. I mean, in this ecosystem for 15 years now, and I don't think there is a way to cut down the timing needed to build trust. I think if we would have found a solution as a humanity, we would be much better off and quickly. It takes time. You're operating in an environment of competition, competitors and cooperating, and you can find incentives to support this type of collaboration, but
yes. You're right, it takes time to build trust, but people are not responsible for the circumstances set by policy, for instance. I'm building high-rise buildings in wood to store carbon. It works in so many cities, but every city seems to invent that new. They don't trust each other. Hamburg does not trust Vienna. Vienna builds 84 meters high with wood structures. Hamburg has to do the same procedure for 2 years. We're not going to solve problems that way. And that's not something with people build trust. Those politicians standing, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, they just should fix their trust bases on that level. That's politics. That's not people's trust.
Yes, but here is the question: is what is the role of the policymaker in this environment, in the ecosystem? The role of the policy is not to interfere into how the collaboration takes place between the companies, because that's the wrong way. The role of the policy is to create the right framework conditions for them to thrive. The role of the cluster organization, those people like you and me who are taking the companies by the hand and say, hey guys, there's an opportunity out there, why don't you just go together, because you have those competencies and you have those competencies. They're complementary and you could go there together. And that's what I mean, it takes time, but the policy should not intervene in the way companies...
But give the freedom to the people,
yes.
that they are allowed to talk about what they know. That's the problem.
Yes.
They sign NDAs for everything, so we can talk with us together, but don't share anything. That's nice to have a coffee, but that's not an improvement. That's what I meant. That's so important to set them free from these structures. That was the point. Sorry.
Kristianne, going back to the question that the one lady asked, what is the one thing that makes a supercluster successful? What would be your answer to that?
Well, I'll answer with this. And I think, from what I'm hearing with the discussion, these are really important questions around the trust and the collaboration. I mean, that is very foundational. But working with clusters and superclusters, they are very complex systems. It's a little bit like playing 5 tables of chess at the same time, and you have to get them to work together. Simplify it by the following, and then I'll answer your question.
Good.
20 years ahead, what are the top 10 industries of Europe? Now, you could say, I don't know, but we have to realize that we're competing with other countries and regions that are much more actively working on that, including the Chinese and the Chinese government and Chinese cluster programs. So if we follow Amy Webb's cone, we can reasonably forecast a number of key industries: clean energy technologies, smart mobility, artificial intelligence, etc. And then the question is, how do we compete and win on those globally? And the answer most likely is going to be we have to build innovation superclusters around those for Europe. And that's happening. That shift is already happening. Now, how do we make it successful? It is a matter of aligning a lot of pieces. You need to align the key industry leaders, the key venture capitalists, the key government leaders, the key policymakers, the key research institutes, the key international partners, the key regional governments, the key local community. And it's a massive challenge. It's a lot of fun to work with.
Now, I know you're being asked the question all the time, but I have to get to it because Kristianne mentioned it in her presentation, the Silicon Valley. I know the Silicon Valley, I think it doesn't fit your definition of a supercluster, right?
Yeah.
And that is because?
Well, it's quite simple. So when you look at the Silicon Valley, it has many different ecosystems overlapping, and you can't walk into an office and find the CEO of Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Now, you can find a lot of supporting organizations. You can find, people like Kurt, who's, without having a CEO title, he's pretty, up there. The difference is, if we go to Boston and the life science cluster, there you can actually go into an office and find the CEO. And then here we'll actually say that, I'm pretty much in charge of trying to get all of these different parts to work smarter together. I'm not in charge, but I'm really doing my best to sort of get all of these herding cats at a system level with the Boston Life Science cluster. So that's a big difference.
Okay, so it's not a supercluster, but I think we can agree that, and every data shows that something clustered there in the Silicon Valley, right? Yeah. And not only for the benefit of everybody, because there are huge pitfalls of these areas. The living costs are absurdly high. Startups are not even going there anymore, etc., etc. How can we sort of reap the benefits of your cluster idea without falling into the traps of the negative aspects?
So the answer is very simple, but it's not very realistic, and that is a new political system in the US.
That's a
because
huge topic.
What we have is this extreme polarization, although they're both sort of leaning towards the right by European standards. So imagine if we had a multi-party, like a genuine multi-party system in the US, and a genuine representation of those problem points, where you would have what in Europe would be more left-oriented politicians that actually realize these were problems that governments have a role in fixing. So that's the answer, and then it's beyond the two of us to solve that.
That is definitely true. Yes. Are there any questions? Any more questions coming from the audience?
I can just add on this while you're getting a question. There is a need for understanding, learning about these cluster structures, and I'm seeing a lot of conversations in different places of people saying, how can we learn more about this? Because we're trying to implement bits and pieces, but it is not that successful. So for those of you that are interested, there's a few copies of the report, lots of nice photos and pictures and colors. But really, it's a question of how do we learn this at scale with Europe.
Okay. think we have time for one final question, so make it a good one.
It seems like I'm really privileged to answer the final one.
You are.
Yes, we also worked several years with the Chinese government in working on their own cluster strategies. But to be honest, just very short on this remark and then jump into my question. So for the Chinese super cluster model, it's not just like at the local level, it's at the central level. So everything which in China talking about a cluster, it's not just like some city is building up their cluster, it's a national team jumping into the ocean, right? So that is totally different. But to Shanghai, it's also different because Shanghai is super rich. So they put a lot of money into the fundamental research, even including the free electronics, the mega thing that is really just like a rocket science project, right? So Shanghai is different. So, but my question would be just like, how could we really empower the local level to build up the cluster things, especially for the national policymakers, the majority of the R&D resources or the just like the fundamental research resources are still allocated by the national government directly into universities, but so, which we could say from the local level, the city level, yeah, nobody care what the city level is doing. So how could we really empower the local level?
I would say empower people. So find the right people and putting the people at finding the answers to your question. I mean, the easiest answer or the concrete answer is create a cluster organization, create this team of people who literally understands the need of the industry. That's what I mentioned. If you don't understand what they need, that would be very difficult to bring them to, to build trust, to collaborate and produce innovation. So, and these people do need a lot of soft skills. You're having like a white paper in front of you. You have these agglomerations and the challenge is how to bring them to collaborate with each other. And that's again, you cannot build a platform for doing that, out of question. You need the people who are starting this process. So cluster organization as facilitators, as orchestrators of the ecosystem are the answer.
Kristianne, you wanted to elaborate?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. We are providing them with houses and we're providing them with people that can make things happen, make the connections that Kristianne showed, make them happen, and also then giving them competence, because as Kristianne is also mentioning, there's a lot of lack of knowledge on how to do this. So that's the three things we are doing: houses, people. We finance people, and then we give them competence in being able to do that.
And there should be people who really, when I say understand this, it's there are 1,080 clusters, and there are 180 clusters. So not two clusters are alike. Even if we're saying in Austria 60 clusters, they're different. So that makes it very difficult. They are so divergent, so heterogeneous, that there is no solution in saying why you apply this way of running a cluster or orchestrating a cluster in the same applies to you. So you have to find your own formula that works in your own environment. So if the cluster orientation is more research oriented, producing research, then you have to have somebody who understands the world of research, but there is a need to bring this research to the market. So you have to have somebody in the team who understands the business needs. And then these 2, 3, 10, 20 people, they need to work together to make the outer connections there.
Okay. Thanks for your question. Thank you for speaking. Thank you for listening and asking questions. We have brochures. We have Norwegian chocolate, right, for everyone. And Kristianne, please say hi to your dad from us as well. Thank you all.